He only needs a half a sack to tie Ben Davidson for number 3. Davidson played in the late 60s, early 70s. Max Crosby has 61 and a half sacks. Ben Davidson has 62. Welcome to Just the Stats NFL, the show that covers the NFL statistical leaders from the all-time greats to the current players leading the NFL. I'm Ernie Jennings, your host, and in this podcast, we'll be looking at the Raiders versus the Colts, the Las Vegas Raiders and the Indianapolis Colts. All right, before I get started, just let me say I'm still tinkering and changing the way I do this podcast. Ultimately, I'm doing these podcasts because I like the stats, as I mentioned before. I like knowing what teams' players are in their top 10 for their team or the NFL. I especially like that, of course, the NFL, who's moving up the all-time lists in those types of categories. I also want to be able to watch the rookies, and I want to watch the stats for games, seasons, and careers. Well, when we're this early into the season right now, we're just talking pretty much career numbers, unless there's some game stat that I have to start paying more attention to. But the season stats will start showing up, in the second half of the season, players that might be starting to move into the top 10 for their team in some kind of category, or for the NFL records. Like I'll be watching Puka Nacua as he possibly can be the first receiver to get 2,000 receiving yards. But anyway, I'm still tinkering with how I'm doing this. So my last one, I didn't care for so much the way I did it. So this one, I'm doing it a little different. I still will do the game review, give you injury update, but I'll always start off with the top 10 that I would like to watch. So I'm kind of saying top 10 to watch for, top 10 players to watch for in the upcoming game between these two teams. So that's what I'm working on. And if you have any suggestions, no problem. I'd like to hear them. Otherwise, I'm going to continue to tinker with it myself as I feel like, do I like the podcast as I present it? So here we go. Las Vegas Raiders at the Indianapolis Colts. This game is being played at Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. The Indianapolis Colts are 3-1 right now. And let's look at the top 10 players to watch in this game for the Indianapolis Colts. And that would be Michael Pittman, who is number 6 all-time in receptions for the Indianapolis Colts. Number 5 is Dallas Clark. So Pittman has 426 receptions. Dallas Clark has 427. So I'm sure that Michael Pittman will move into number 5 all-time as far as receptions for the Indianapolis Colts. All he needs is 1 to tie, 2 to move into the lead. And then it's going to take a couple years to get into the top 4. There's a big gap between 5 and 6 and 3 and 4, as is there's another huge gap between 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. I mean, Marvin Harrison leads the team all time with 1,102 receptions. So long ways for Michael Pittman to go there. All right, another one for Pittman as he's moving into this top 10. He's trying to move into the top 10 as far as yards go. Right now he's number 11. Roger Carr is 10th all time. Roger Carr played from 1974 to 81. He's got 4,770 yards. So Michael Pittman needs 65 yards in this game to make that 67 yards. He needs 67 yards to pass Roger Clark to move into 10th all time, to move on to the top 10 in this particular category. So we'll be watching Michael Pittman for sure. Now, looking at tackles for loss, this is interesting. This team is strange. You've got several players. You've got 4 players that are trying to either get into the top 10 or are in the top 10 for the Indianapolis Colts. Pretty interesting. So you got one player who's 14th right now. He needs 6 to get into the top 10. But in the meantime, There's another player that only needs 2. And you also then have, actually, there's 5 players here we're talking about. You also have 3 players in the top 10 already that are currently active on the team. At number 9 is Kwity Paye. He's got 33. He needs 2 to move into a tie for 8th. And then in 6th and 7th are 2 active players as well. Grover Stewart has 41 tackles for loss, and Kenny Moore has 37 tackles for loss. So those 2 players are continuing to push their way toward number 5, which was Raheem Brock, who has 45. And then one more player is DeForest Buckner, who's 3rd all-time with 54 sacks. And that's where this all stops, because you've got several players, like I said, all the way from 27 to 54 tackles for loss. But that's where it kind of comes to an abrupt halt, because number 1 and number 2 are 2 players who have over 100 tackles for loss. So a long ways between number 2, Robert Mathis, who has 108 tackles for loss, and DeForest Buckner, who has 54. And then you have Dwight Freeney, who leads the team all time with 113 tackles for loss. So it'll be interesting to watch as positions change between 3 and 10, but there won't be any changes in number 1 and 2 for quite a few years. All right. Let's take a look at the Las Vegas Raiders. They are 1-3, so they're having a rough season. They are losing some games incredibly strangely. They shouldn't have lost last week, but they did. And, it's just the way it goes, I guess. Now, for them, we only have one top 10 player to watch, and that's Max Crosby, who continues to move up the list as far as sacks. He's already the tackles for loss leaders for the Raiders, but he's moving up the list when it comes to sacks. Right now, he's in 4th. He only needs a half a sack to tie Ben Davidson for number 3. Davidson played in the late 60s, early 70s. Max Crosby has 61 and a half sacks. Ben Davidson has 62. Now, after that, again, just like we were talking about with the Colts, it's a long way to get to number 2 for Max Crosby. Number 2 is Howie Long with 91 and a half sacks. And then leading the Raiders all time is Greg Townsend, who played in the 80s and 90s. He's got 107.5 sacks. So Max Crosby will definitely move into 3rd this year. And then after that, we'll have to see how it goes. It's a long way to the next to mark. All right, let's take a look at this game real quick. Who do we think is going to win? Right now, the Raiders are averaging 19 points a game, which is 24th in the NFL, while the Colts are averaging almost 31, which is 4th best. Big difference there. Looking at a couple of other things, here's another category, turnover differential. The Colts are +3, which is 6th in the NFL, while the Raiders are -4, which is 29th in the NFL. And that has to do with Geno Smith interceptions last week, 3 plus a turnover by Ashton Genty, which was on a very strange play. So they're just killing themselves. They're both decent in total penalties. Now, looking at this as far as advantages go, for the Raiders on offense, they're 22nd in passing efficiency. The Colts are 14th best in passing defense, so favoring the Colts there. The same in rushing, though this could be changing. The Raiders in rushing efficiency are 27th. The Colts are 16th in rushing defense. But that could change because last week the Raiders had a breakout game for Genty in the rushing department. So if they finally gotten their act together as far as figuring out how to get him out the gate, and he's still being hit in the backfield way too quickly. He's one of the top running backs as far as how quickly he's being hit before he can even reach the line of scrimmage. So we'll see if that improves. If it does improve, that this number on the rushing department for the Raiders could definitely go much better. Now for the Colts on offense, well, they're extremely strong and the Raiders are weak. Passing efficiency, right now, Daniel Jones has been incredible this year for the Colts. They're number 3 in passing efficiency overall. The Raiders' defense is number 25. Rushing efficiency for the Colts is number 4. I mean, you got Jonathan Taylor there. And Daniel Jones is no slouch if he needs to run. The defense for the Raiders, this is their strength. They're number 6 right there. So that will be an area where they'll be able to hold their own, I believe. So how do we predict this game? Well, it's in Indianapolis. The Colts, they lost to the Rams 27-20 last week for their first loss, and the Raiders lost to the Chicago Bears 25-24. Rough game. They shouldn't have lost the game. It was just a bad game all the way around. Geno Smith, he's throwing for a decent amount of yards, but he's got 6 touchdown passes, but 7 interceptions already. He's got a quarterback rating of 79. And he's been hit and miss. So if this is a game where he's hitting, the Raiders have a chance. On the other hand, Daniel Jones has been consistent. Only 4 touchdowns passing, 2 interceptions, but he's got a quarterback rating of 103.3. Really impressive year for him so far. I'm predicting that the Raiders lose this game. I just think that they got to go cross country all the way to Indianapolis. And unless Geno Smith can put his act together, and maybe they try to rely on Genty and rush this ball as much as possible against a middle of the pack rushing defense, maybe they have a chance, but I'm going to say the Colts win this game. All right, that's a wrap for this episode of Just the Stats NFL. Please like or subscribe on YouTube at Just the Stats NFL. You can comment there as well. You can also find this podcast on any of your podcast apps, on Apple, Spotify, and other ones. You can contact me at justthestatsnfl@gmail.com if you'd like. All right, I appreciate you listening, and I like this podcast better than the last one, so that's a good start. All right, on to the next one.